Baker Botts, LLP, provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice and are not intended to establish an attorney client relationship. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Welcome to AI Council Code. The AI Council Code is here to keep you up to date on all AI legal issues arising in the modern business frontier. I'm your host, Maggie Welsh, and today we're back with Baker Botts intellectual property partner Mark Spiegel and Dr. Pablo Rivas, assistant professor of computer science at Baylor University and an expert on large language models. In our previous episodes, Mark and Dr. Rivas discuss what is AI and how do we define generative AI, and then some challenges scientists and engineers are facing in terms of AI. Today we're back to continue their conversation where they'll be discussing a hot topic, copyright issues with AI. So let's rejoin Mark now.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about an area that's near and dear to my heart as the IP lawyer in the room, copyright. And this has been a topic that's absolutely in the news, people having lawsuits involving OpenAI. And I think the New York Times has one lawsuit, and Sarah Silverman and some other authors have a lawsuit alleging that there's copyright infringement from OpenAI and other AI models that have been trained on the copyrighted works of different authors. So I'd love to dig in more with you on how copyright law and AI intersect. I found that I have these conversations with other lawyers. We often break down at some point because we don't really understand how the technology works well enough. And specifically, it comes to what are we actually saying is the copy at issue? So maybe let's talk about that. And how would you describe when an AI model is trained on a work, what happens to that work within the AI model that's been trained?
This is a great question. And this comes back to knowing what the model is. So let's assume that we know, and that's a big problem for AI, that unless they give access to an expert to know what's going on under the hood, we don't know exactly if it is actually memorizing things. Let's talk about models that are out in the open that we know how they work. We can go in there. And as far as we know, models don't memorize data identically in a way that you would do, for example, in a database, that you go and query this data and it's there. But it does something very similar to memorizing, and that is able to learn the formula, so to speak, that will reproduce that exactly. I'll give you yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about the difference in if I have a copy of a song. It's like Napster. Napster was a big copyright issue when people were saving copies of songs on their computers. That obviously was copyright infringement when you're taking somebody's song and saving it in your computer. The analogy for AI might be that your AI model is learning how to sing that song, but there's a question about whether it's actually saving a copy of the song.
Correct. As far as I know, models today, specifically large language models, which are the ones that are usually accused of this, we know that they don't store a copy of it. And that is, there's no copy of the data exactly, but it knows, it really doesn't know, but there's enough information to reconstruct that piece. So think about, for example, compression. In data compression, if we have a Word document, it is saved on a digital file. If we compress it, it changes forms into a smaller compressed number of bits and bytes there. And then that is not exactly an identical copy of the original document, but it's a representation of that you can use to recover the original. Now, AI doesn't do that part exactly, but it is an analogy that you have enough information to recover something out that looks exactly like the input. It's easier in words than text, but it's much harder in images. In images, you might be able to tell the difference in pixels.
This is interesting because the definition of copies when you're talking about the copyright statute is essentially that it's anything fixed in a tangible medium is the buzzword that you all learn in law school is you have copyright when it's fixed in a tangible medium. The statute says it has to be copies are material objects in which a work is fixed by any method now known or later developed and from which the work can be perceived, reproduced, or otherwise communicated. So that's an excerpt, or paraphrase some of that, but it sounds like what you're saying is it's really a close call whether this would be a copy, because you can reproduce a lot of the information from the original, but it's maybe not exactly the original.
Exactly. I think that's the point of the experts in the field, that we shouldn't call it memorizing, because it's not how memory works to begin with, but in a way it knows, or it contains enough information that you would be able to reproduce. And I think that's where it gets closer to a definition, because you could reproduce something with partial information or a specific stimulus in the input. You could reproduce something, even though the something is not there.
That's interesting. And one of the most famous examples from some of these cases and controversies that came up, there was a photograph, I think it was of a soccer player, who it happened to be saved online with a specific watermark from the original company that owned the copyright in that photograph. Later, an AI model was asked to create hey, give me a photo of soccer, or make a picture of a soccer player. It made a very similar picture. With the person was twisted a little bit different, and it wasn't exactly the same pose, and you get those artifacts on the hands and eyes and stuff, but it had the same watermark. It had that watermark from the owner still on that picture, which everybody who saw that, kind of your gut reaction when you see that is, oh, the model must have a copy of that picture that it's using to produce this output. I think it's interesting that what you're saying is it's trying to make that picture, but it can't. And so that's a question of, if you're trying to make a copy, but you can't, do you have a copy?
Right. And that is similar to remember, we were talking earlier about autoencoders, that you have this AI model that has two pieces. One, it's an encoder, the other's not the decoder. The encoder takes a picture of, let's say, a football player, and it gives you a vector representation. And the decoder will take this vector and recreate that football player from this vector. Now imagine that you only have the decoder. What if I give a vector that didn't come from the football player, but I'll give you something close to it? This decoder will probably reconstruct something that looks like the player, but doesn't have the information of the player, but it has enough information to, from this vector, reconstruct things that look like that.
So that's an interesting question, that some of these, when you have your model that's been trained, it's going to be reacting to inputs from a user that it uses as a new input vector. Is it fair to say that the decoder, as you just described it, would not by itself have the information to make a complete copy until it receives some kind of input vector from a user?
That's correct. It needs to be prompted in a very specific way. Talking about language models or any generative AI, you have to work on how to stimulate the model properly in order to get or reproduce almost identically something from the training data.
One way to say that is that when you have the model, if you're just sitting on the desk, model of the desk without anybody activating it, that model doesn't have the picture of the football player in it. It needs stimulation from a user before it could recreate that picture.
Yes, and it needed to have seen something like that before to retraining data. If it never saw something like that, it may not produce the presentation that closely resembles that football player.
Yeah, I think there's obviously, the copyright sites here, I think there's 3 levels in my mind. And one of them is just that, if you're taking somebody's copyrighted picture of a football player and making a copy of it to use in your training, that's old school copyright infringement. You can't do that. That's just like Napster copying the songs. If you're copying it before you use it as training, I think everybody understands the rules for that. There's a really interesting question in the middle about what happens, when you've trained your model, but it's not being used and it's just sitting on the desk and nobody's touching it. And the question is, does that model have a copy sitting in it? We talked about that, and that's good. I want to turn to the third one about, what about models where I can go to it and I can tell the model, hey, what is the first sentence to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? And it can tell me that. It'll tell me what the first sentence of that book is. And that's a copyrighted sentence. How is it that sometimes models do get exact copies that they're able to reproduce like that?
A lot of it is training data. If talking about large language models, and the reason why they're called large is that they're big, but also this use of big data sets. And I am sure that in the training data said someone asked that question that you just asked, what is the first sentence? Someone online on Reddit or on Twitter, someone said, what is the first sentence of? And so there's data for that, and there's an answer to that. And not only that, but large language models, because they are probabilistic, or they're trained to give you the most likely answer or the most likely sequence of words. They're supposed to give you, or they can make some leaps or fill gaps that are not there. For example, if you misspelled something, even if in the original training data you had the correct spelling and the right answer, even if I give a question of a large language model with a question that is similar or that is misspelled or has some errors in the question, it would still be able to give the right answer. It is resilient to noise, and that makes it very nice in some sense, but it's also one of the reasons why you could get them to tell you things that you were not asking and or hallucinations. But that's how some information has been leaked before in OpenAI, that someone is asking a question and the model is stimulated in a very weird way or new way and gives you an answer from other user, from their training data that was copyrighted, for example.
That is interesting. So we've been talking longer than we should. So I'm going to move quickly to our next topic, and that just has to do with the ownership of the model itself, which I think is a fascinating question and has a lot of layers on the intellectual property side, starting with the fact that right now in the United States, you can't copyright the output of AI. And the idea is that the copyright and patent rights are supposed to vest in people. And if it's not an actual work of a human author or of a human inventor, you can't actually get proprietary rights in that. I wanted to see what's your vision as somebody who's actually made these models. What kind of human influence does the person who makes a model, or maybe even better, the person who makes the neural network that trains the model, what levers do you have to control the creative outputs from the model itself?
That is a loaded question. Can you rephrase it a little more?
Sure. So
try to break it down.
Yeah. The issue that comes up in the copyright context, it's also in the patent context, but let's talk about it in the copyright context, is if you want to get copyright protection in something that the AI contributed to, you have to show that it was a work of human creativity. And so my question for you, as somebody who's actually made models, if you were training a model, could you set up the training in a way so that the model was going to be creative in certain ways? Like, I want my model to produce stuff that looks like Van Gogh painted it. Can you make stylistic choices in the model and the way you set it up so that it is adding specific features and flares on the output that align with kind of your vision or your creative ideas for how this thing should look?
Right, I get it. I think there's a picture here in my office that is a picture of me and my wife, Nancy, and then we were working on a project with students on a field called transfer learning, and also another subfield called style transfer. And this idea is that if I have enough data about a specific artist like Picasso, Rembrandt, if I have enough paintings of those, I could train the model to say, here's a picture of Picasso, here's a picture of Rembrandt. And the teacher would say, these two are different styles. I need you to differentiate and predict which style is which. And so by teaching a model that there are different styles, it will learn what makes these styles unique. Once a part of the model is trained, you can then take the part of the model that learned the styles and then stimulate it and say, okay, here's a picture of me and my wife at the gym. I wanted to apply the style of Rembrandt, which is that one. And then it will take my picture and transform the pixels in a way that looks like Rembrandt painted it. Now, did Rembrandt paint it? Of course not. But it has some of the stylistic features. So that could be done for images, for text, and for sound as of today, which is that dangerous? I think it might be, especially for phone calls. I think we've seen enough of those in the news. Deep fakes is not a problem. Right. But yeah, the idea of it being possible to learn or have control of creative generation,
Right. And that's what I was getting
Yes.
at with your picture is a great example that you wanted that picture of you and your wife from the gym to have certain features and colorization that are, characteristic of an idea you had in your mind. And you were able to tune the model to achieve that goal. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
And that was the goal. So we can do that. And at the time, it was a scientific exercise for fun. Can we actually do this?
When did
And
you do that, by the way?
those students who did this
Oh, yeah.
about in 2018.
2018. Wow.
Yes. It was their senior project, the capstone project, and they did that. So you could upload your picture and order on a website and then get it shipped.
And everybody was super excited when you could do that on 2023. You were 5 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah, it was a hot topic at the time. Today,
Absolutely.
anyone can do transfer learning, let's hold.
All right. So another thing that you've said in a related context is about models being released. Like you said, there are some models that are publicly released and you can look at them and see what's going on in them. I think it's interesting to think about what does it mean to own a model? And for those models that are publicly released, I assume, are they open source kind of things? Are they things that anybody can use? Are there still people who claim to own those models that are visible? Or what's the kind of understanding of that? Because from a lawyer's perspective, I definitely don't know what you think you own in that model. But
I think there's two major things that we as AI researchers would like to claim ownership. But this is from an academic standpoint, I think. From an academic standpoint, the top thing to own is the algorithm or the methodology to create a model.
is this like the way you fine-tuned the teacher-student model?
Exactly. So it goes from I tell you what data I used.
Mhm.
I tell you how many neurons I used here, what type of learning algorithm I used, or how long did I train it, and what equipment I trained it. And I give you everything you need to do to replicate my model on your own, to the point that you could use a different data or a different type of application to it. But you're using my idea, my model. We own that process, we release it, and it's public in a paper. But the other thing is, and this is more common in industry, is that whenever they have access to these huge training models that nobody else does, when they have access to these huge GPU farms and great compute power that nobody else has, then they train a model. And even though they release it to the public, they know nobody will be able to do this because they don't have enough resources. So what they do sometimes is they save that model, the bits and bytes of the model, and they release that to the public. The rest of us could actually use that model and either use pieces of it, retrain it ourselves, or just use it. And so that is the other ownership of that.
Do they charge money for it when they release that model? Is it free access, or is it if they release the model?
Once they release it, it's out. They're not supposed to charge. Some of them come with a license that explicitly says we're releasing it for an academic license. If you're not using it in production or some application, you need to pay, or you cannot use it for that. And so that's how they limit or restrict access. But it's an honor system at this point, and I guess when it gets successful, then we call the lawyers.
Absolutely. I guess when you access that license, is it just like a click to agree kind of license?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not even that. It's just out there, and there's a file that says license readme. Yes.
If there's no place for the user to agree, I would have a really hard time enforcing that license.
True.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about ethics in AI. And I know, why don't you just talk a little bit about your work with the IEEE and what that has an intersection here with ethics?
IEEE is an international organization that has a group called IEEE Standards Association. And so they are famous for standards like JPEG, which is the one people use for images. Also Wi-Fi, it's IEEE 802.11 ABCD number. And the idea of creating standards is the idea that you can trust that there was a group of experts that were together working to make sure that we all do things in the same way for the same goal. If the goal is to have a stable Wi-Fi connection that is safe for humans and that is safe to manufacture and it's accessible to people, then we use IEEE 802.11. If you want to use a format for, say, a picture that I want to share with you, I use JPEG, and I know for a fact that you probably, if we use the same standard, you'll be able to. Now, when it comes to ethics, what they did is the same process. They put together groups of experts, and the goal is to have a standard way of making AI that that has specific considerations. So one of them was algorithmic bias, and that is the standard 7000. Still in the works. I think we're gonna submit it to vote in a few months. And what it will do is to tell any AI maker or developer that if we all follow these standards and these procedures, the AI that you will produce is most likely be safe for the public consumption or public use, and you'll have documented processes of who is going to be accountable if something goes wrong, how to report it, and how to release to the public what were your efforts to make, or that you did your due diligence in reporting any potential or known flaws of any models. So that's an example of a standard. Another one is about emotions, that if you use AI to simulate emotions, like in a chatbot, what are the necessary precautions to take of documenting cases or human trials where people develop affection beyond what is considered healthy for a human being to a machine, and where's the line? So we try to have a standard documents these things.
Talk more about that. That's an interesting idea, that you have to modulate and control what the AI does to prevent people from getting too emotionally attached. Is that right?
That's correct. So the amount, for example, the time of interaction needs to be limited. Certain phrases need to be reiterated to a human every now and then. For example, I'm only a chatbot, and here's the answer to your question. That kind of reinforcement of things. I'm not sure if you use ChatGPT, or any people who are listening to the podcast have used ChatGPT, but there's a time when you get that message a lot. I'm only a chatbot. I don't know the answer to this, or I'm only a chatbot. This is the answer to your thing, or that phrasing.
It's emotional guardrail kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's great that you're trying to make sure that this technology, which is obviously going to impact life a lot, is done responsibly. All right. We've been going, I think, way over our time, but I do want to make sure we hit our most fun idea. And that's just, I'd love to hear a couple ideas from you on both. What are we going to say about AI in 2 years? And then what are we going to say about AI when we look back on this particular moment in time 20 years from now?
I have dreams. I have dreams, but only because AI is my passion. I think I dream about things all the time. And I think in the future we'll have AI that will be making the human interactions much more fun. I think AI will relieve human beings of very repetitive tasks and will give us time to do other things or pursue other things. And I'm talking from my email that I probably got 100 emails from the time we were talking to now. And I wish that there was AI that would respect my privacy and not publish any of those emails. If I don't know, it might be from student emails that I need to keep confidential, but safe, private, that will go through those and tell me, yeah, all these are spam, and you should answer those first and prioritize and make me more productive so that I can focus more on my students and mentoring them and investing time that way.
Is that a 2-year dream or a 20-year dream?
I think that's super close. I would think within a year we could have something like that. And it comes down to privacy at this point. I think there are more and more generative AI that is private. And I think we as humans, as a society, would need to make some rough decisions on what we think it's okay for AI to do, on which things are we going to let go of the rail of the control. We need to let go of some controls. But which ones do we start with? My email, okay, I could let it try and go and answer to some emails automatically, and then relinquish control to some extent. And for other things, self-driving cars, do we still want a human, even though self-driving itself, we still want a human at least remotely connected to this car, or up to which point are we going to just go fully automated? And so those questions are for us as society, and for governments also to organize and tell us, like, this is how we do it. And I think one of the dreams I have is that there will be AI agent.
Each person has their own specific AI.
Yes. Well, an AI that continues your values.
Yeah.
What do you value the most as a human being? And based on that profile, you will get AI that is compatible with your values. And you will also have protections from that.
Interesting. That's more like a 20-year dream.
That is much easier. I think I've heard people from Harvard trying to do this with politics. Like you have an agent that has your voter values, and whenever there's a quick decision to make, like in the pandemic, for example, when decisions need to be made fast, that those agents could tell lawmakers very quickly what would people react to certain decisions because they contain your values and your what do you care about, and that could be helpful for some politicians and lawmakers.
Absolutely.
So my dream with AI is something like for AI consumption or use.
Well, Dr. Rivas, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know we've taken up a lot more time than we planned for, and I hope to have another chance to talk with you again soon.
Sure. Thank you for your time.
All right, that concludes Mark's conversation with Dr. Rivas. Thank you for listening to AI Council Code. We're so glad that you joined us today. Stay tuned for additional podcasts and more insights on AI legal issues.
Thank you for listening to this BakerBots podcast. BakerBots has the experience, knowledge, and people to address our clients' most significant legal issues. For more information on BakerBots practices, please visit us at bakerbots.com. This presentation is provided by BakerBots LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.